Welcome to this virtual kickoff of yet another Cornell SC Johnson College of Business lifelong learning experience, Responsible Leadership, Harnessing AI for the Greater Good. I'm Robert Bloomfield, Nicholas H. Noyes Professor of Management and Professor of Accounting at the SC Johnson Graduate School of Business. We're hosted today by eCornell, which offers a variety of the college's lifelong learning options. I know because I've authored two eCornell certificate programs, Financial Accounting and Management Accounting for Leaders. And my strategic decision-making course is part of the Executive Leadership Certificate, among others. Our focus today is on artificial intelligence, technologies that harvest vast amounts of data, apply vast amounts of processing power to transform that data into predictions, recommendations, and creative content that ranges from essays, music, images, to computer programs, TV scripts, and whatever they're going to turn their sights to next. Before I introduce our panelists, I want to point out that you have a box on your website for questions. Feel free to ask your questions at any time, and we'll get to as many as we can at the end of the session. Our panelists today are Andrew Chin, a Cornell 93 grad with a 94 MBA from my own Johnson School, now serving as Head of Investment Solutions and Sciences at AllianceBernstein. Sarah Krebs, the John L. Wetherill Professor in the Department of Government, Adjunct Professor of Law, and the Director of the Tech Policy Institute in the Cornell Brooks School of Public Policy. And third, John Wu, a 92 grad from the Dyson School and now president of Ava Labs, an Andreessen Horowitz-backed technology company building the next generation blockchain platform, Avalanche. With the names and titles out of the way, I'll let you introduce yourselves in a more meaningful way by asking each of you to answer the following question. AI seems poised to become an immensely powerful technology. What powers are most relevant to your work, and what does it mean to use that power responsibly? Andrew Chin, let's start with you.
All right, thanks, Robert. Hi to my fellow panelists and all the Cornellians out there. Go Big Red. Thank you for joining us today. It's great to be a part of this panel and discussing responsible AI. As Rob said, I graduated from Cornell with my undergrad degree and my MBA about 30 years ago. I've kept close ties to Cornell, and I've been teaching an asset management class for the last 10 years in Cornell's engineering school. I work for AllianceBernstein, an asset management firm with over $750 billion in assets. My team manages approximately 60 billion in assets or so, and we've developed various investment strategies and capabilities to help us outperform for our clients. AI is one of the areas I oversee, leveraging its capabilities across the organization. AI is certainly very powerful, offering a wide spectrum of opportunities for our workforce and for our everyday lives. Within asset management, we've leveraged AI to help our investment teams make better and faster decisions, to help our sales teams engage more holistically with our clients, and to help our operations teams be more efficient in their workflows. Let me just give you some examples of how AI is being used in our industry as a sense of the opportunities within finance. First, AI is used for interpretation, right? To help us understand data sources that may be audio, video, text. Examples include corporate filings, news articles, presentations, podcasts. One common interpretation goal is sentiment analysis, assessing the sentiment or tone of text as a driver of future returns. We also leverage AI to summarize documents, such as earnings calls, company filings, news articles. This allows our teams to synthesize more information much, much faster. Third, AI is also used for chatbots. In our industry, this would include internal chatbots within the firm, as well as chatbots for our clients to interact with us. Prediction is one of the most important tasks that we have. After all, we are trying to outperform the markets, and we are trying to do better for our clients. And we've used models for these purposes for decades, but AI certainly offers more opportunities to create more powerful models. And then finally, I would say that Gen AI is very compelling. Being able to generate written text, audio, video can dramatically change how we run our businesses. And one simple example is using these tools to generate market commentaries. Instead of humans pulling together data from various places to describe market performance, These tools can be used to synthesize various data sources and create first drafts or commentaries, as an example. So there certainly are many exciting opportunities for AI, and we're striving to realize the potential benefits. But having said that, there are a variety of challenges with using these technologies and techniques. And within the context of responsible AI, I do want to highlight some challenges within finance. Data privacy is critical. We deal with lots of confidential data in our industry about our clients, about our strategies, and it's imperative that we use AI in a way that keeps our data secure. Bias is another potential challenge. All large language models are trained on existing data, whether public or private, and there may be biases in existing data sets. For example, most of the text may be in English, and it's possible that cultural or social biases may be introduced from that. And then finally, accountability is critical to responsible AI. While we leverage AI and other tools to help us make investment decisions, our employees are ultimately responsible for all decisions, and it's important to be crystal clear on those expectations. So hopefully that gives you a broad overview of the opportunities within finance, as well as some of the key challenges in practicing responsible AI.
Okay, Andrew Chen, thank you very much. Let's move on to Sarah Krebs. Sarah, power and responsibility.
Yeah, thanks, Rob, and thanks to eCornell and my co-panelists. It's great to be here. So as Rob said in the introduction, I am a professor at Cornell in the public policy school and in the law school and in the Department of Government. And I direct the Tech Policy Institute. And that sort of, I think, summarizes how I approach AI, which is this intersection of public policy and law and national security. And my introduction to AI was back in 2018, and I started working on these questions, actually the irresponsible use of AI. And I had written a book about the role of social media in foreign election interference. And I went to a presentation, a pitch really, by OpenAI, and they were talking about this large language model called GPT-2. And they were talking about the capabilities of this model, and it was so much more powerful than the previous version, GPT-1. And kind of my wheels were turning, and I'm a big fan of interdisciplinary conversations and work, kind of emblematic of, or this panel is emblematic of that. They hadn't really thought about the national security risks of these language models. But as someone who comes at this from that perspective, I started thinking, well, what are the limitations of the social media impact on the election in 2016 was just scale. So now you have this tool that could scale up mis and disinformation. So I started working with OpenAI to help them think through what these implications were for national security. And I was very much, I think, back in the day, kind of a doomer, that this was going to be the huge adverse implications for national security. And I still think that is a real risk of these language models. But I think, so I'm writing a book right now on the public policy and legal implications of new technologies. And what I've seen is that when new technologies come out, there's often this kind of like the doomsday scenarios. What is this going to do? And I think that's very salient in this context as well as AI, but I think there are real opportunities as well. And I think I've come I've come around to that perspective as well. So some of my work has been recently in the last year or two with the Global South and government institutions in other parts of the world that are trying to think about how they can use these models. And I think there are real potential benefits and opportunities there in the way that these models can help bridge the gap between individuals and their government bureaucracies. A lot of individuals around the world feel disconnected from their institutions, and actually these models can really help translate, and I mean that both in terms of language, but also kind of complicated bureaucracies to a range of individuals. So I think that's really important. But I think where we are right now, and I think we'll talk about this later in the panel, is thinking through how do we balance these risks and these opportunities? Because I think they're both very present. And I think what's important is that governments working with private industry think through how they can harness the benefits while also minimizing the risk.
Okay, Sarah Krebs, thank you. Let's move on to John Wu, Power and Responsibility in AI.
Well, thank you, Robert, and thank you to my panelists. As Robert earlier said, I'm a proud Cornellian, class of '92 from the Dyson School. I'm president of Ava Labs. Ava Labs is a blockchain software and services company. It's also the team that created Avalanche. Avalanche is an open source blockchain technology. Actually, it's governed by a foundation, so the governance of it is completely separate. Think about it like Linux and Red Hat. We're more Red Hat developing stuff on top of Avalanche. The great thing about Ava Labs is actually it is done and born right out of the University of Cornell through the computer science lab. It was a great professor in distributed systems there, Dr. Ayman Gunsir, and two of his PhD students created the underlying consensus protocol, and we commercialized it about 4.5, 5 years ago. And since then, I'm proud to say, about 70 Cornellians have come through our doors. Most of them are from the computer science department. I have spent an entire career investing before operating tech companies, investing in technology right after Cornell. I was at a firm called Tiger Management. And then after business school, I was at a place called Kingdon Capital running their tech portfolio. And ultimately, I started my own tech firm. And it's been important for me to bring that back because part of what I've always done is try to identify the next emerging, is a principal investing area, all the places I've worked for, what they call the buy side. And I spent a career of identifying emerging technologies, hopefully before the steep part of the S curve to get ahead of it. And I would love to have some of the tools. We used to have to hire bodies or a lot of outsourced software companies to create the tools that Andrew was talking about earlier. So things would probably be done a lot easier and quicker today. But I think as it relates to AI, I am a big proponent, obviously, of open source technology. And what we're seeing on the platform of Avalanche is a lot of innovative young AI companies who also believe that the provenance of the data and or the training of LLMs should be transparent and open and done in an open source manner. So they're trying to build solutions on top of the Avalanche blockchain. And to me, I think that is very, very important because as an investor, I've seen the way Web 2 has grown, or what I call Web 2, the existing web, and I call Web 3 the future between blockchain, AI, and all of that. And Robert actually educated all of us on a specific word that I didn't know actually existed. I think a couple of days ago, I thought he was making it up, frankly, but it's actually, I looked it up. There's a Wikipedia on it, so actually it's a real word. It's called enshittification. And that basically describes something we kind of all know, but wasn't so eloquent as whoever created that word, or Robert did, which is basically what we saw in technology. And I've seen it by investing in internet companies, mobile companies, SaaS companies early, as well as, social companies. It's first, it uses technologies to create something that attracts you, the user. And then some point later on, it starts extracting value from you. So it attracts you by providing you some efficiency, some benefit, communications from social media, getting in touch with all your other friends. And then at some point, it migrates to extracting value from you. And hopefully it doesn't get to the point where I think sometimes it is they're exploiting value from you. And then they move on to their partners, their business development partners, and they start extracting value from them and possibly even trying to exploit from them. And what's happened in the internet era, the explosion of the network effect of these companies has allowed certain companies like the Big Seven, they call it, the Magnificent Seven, to really aggregate, frankly, all the data they need on you and your businesses. And they guard that data very, very tightly. And with generative AI, they are the ones that have the money to actually train these models. And when they do that, they're going to guard those models even tighter because it is basically their way to compound even more on their existing data that they have on you. So I think it's great for innovation. It's also great for having a better social contract with users if we can have an open source environment while Sarah and policy does what they need to do.
Hey, thanks, John. That was great, and I'm assuming that we're allowed to say that word, which is not mine, by the way. It is Cory Doctorow's, and it's really been a fundamental thing, as you say, that we've seen for decades in tech. It's just a feature of what they call the walled garden. As opposed to the open source shared setup. So we will definitely dig in to that more. But first, I just want to. These were three great answers to set up the conversation, and it strikes me that we can use this to talk about the AI-related responsibilities at three levels. First, there's the responsibility to make sure our well-intentioned uses of AI actually deliver what they're supposed to without having damaging unintended consequences. And that's Andrew, I take that from your uses, where you're just trying to figure out how you can serve your asset management company and your clients with AI. Then we turn to Sarah Krebs, which is more the responsibility to curtail intentionally malicious uses of AI, like disinformation and scams. And then with John, we get the responsibility to develop AI in a way that avoids undermining our social contract and concentrating too much power into the hands of too few. So, as an accounting professor, I feel obligated to point out that we get responsibility by demanding accountability. We can do that privately through good management practices. We can do that publicly through regulation. And I'd just like to turn the conversation a little bit from responsibility to accountability now. Andrew, starting with you, it strikes me you're operating in a highly regulated industry, and now you're introducing a minimally regulated technology. How do you see accountability? What's going to support the type of responsibility you need to demonstrate? Oh, I don't know if it's just me. I cannot hear.
No, we can't hear.
Sorry about that.
Ah, you're back.
I am back. Sorry about that, Robert. Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head. I mean, generally, we have well-defined regulations for everything that we do in our industry, which is financial services. But with AI, the regulators are playing a little bit of catch-up. The European Union has introduced an AI Act to regulate the development and use of AI. Here in the US, we don't have comprehensive regulation around AI, but the White House has issued guidance on safe practices and usage. So in the absence of comprehensive regulation, many firms are opting to be conservative in their approach to development and usage. For example, I view AI as a tool, a very powerful tool, but still a tool. And with tools, we actually know how to mitigate the various risks and be responsible around the tools that we use. So for example, we have a governance committee within our organization to oversee AI development and usage. And one of the principles that we follow is that these tools are meant to augment, not replace human decision-making. And this principle is critical because it reinforces the fact that our employees, who happen to be humans, are accountable for their final decisions, right? And the analogy that I like to give is that of Iron Man or Iron Person. I hope you all saw the movies, but as you all know, Iron Man is a tech-savvy subject matter expert with an AI-powered suit. The suit helps Iron Person make faster and potentially better decisions because it's able to sift through a huge amount of data and synthesize that data very quickly to make a decision. And while the AI-powered suit is normally correct, the human inside the suit has the power to override the recommendation and therefore own the final decision. And that is how I see our investors. They are subject matter experts in finance, and now they have AI-powered tools to provide them with better and faster insights. Our investors are the final decision makers, and they own the decisions. They can't say that the tools make them do a trade, right? Our clients won't stand for something like that. A related point is automation bias, right? Which can be defined as the tendency to trust tools rather than to think critically ourselves, right? And as I said, subject matter experts are still needed to operate these new tools. And these users of these tools actually need to continue to think critically to be called subject matter experts. So I would say in the absence of clear regulatory guidance, we are looking at existing regulations, and we're using prudence, to guide our use of AI.
Okay, Andrew, thank you. Sarah, let's turn to you. What options do you see for using accountability to curtail the malicious use of AI?
Yeah, I mean, I think Andrew is right to point out the European Union AI Act. And I hear that a lot as kind of, well, why is the US so far behind on AI regulation? And I see this AI Act really as kind of a double-edged sword. I understand that it also is well-intentioned, but I think the concern I would also raise is kind of builds on something John had said, is that we're in the steep part of the S curve. We have exponential growth in terms of the capabilities of AI. And we don't really know what the actual harms will be. So again, the question is, what are the opportunity costs of leaning aggressively into curtailing that growth versus recognizing the potential? And so in this book that I'm writing, I've looked across different emerging technologies to really understand what happens when these new kind of disruptive technologies come into society. And what I've seen is that it really depends on the technology itself, which accountability mechanism makes most sense. So when it came to nuclear weapons, the government was really important because this is a military use case. But there are other cases where, and I try to unpack this accountability ecosystem in the book, it's a lot more diverse than just a government or an international treaty or governance solution. And I think that's very much the case in AI. I see it as a much more heterogeneous group of stakeholders that can enact accountability. So I certainly think that some of these initiatives are again, well-intentioned, and I think are appropriate on the part of the government, but I think they need to be complemented by a couple other individuals or groups. The public, I think, plays a role here. And I think we've already seen this with the release of Google Gemini a few months ago, which is that Google released, I think it's safe to say they were a little bit lagging in terms of what they had released in this generative AI space. So then they kind of rushed this to market, and pretty quickly users started kind of testing this. Tech journalists were using it, and the pushback was pretty swift and negative. And for companies that are using AI, I think I want to put a bit more optimism in this. John talked about the way, basically implying that the market can kind of have perverse incentives, but it can also create incentives for accountability. And that day that the pushback against Gemini was so swift, their stock price went down almost 5%. They lost $90 billion of value. So companies also have market incentives to get this right. And this Sergey Brin came out and said, we fielded this too quickly. We didn't test it well enough. But the public did, and these tech journalists did. So I think they're part of this system as well, of accountability. And all of these actors are kind of interrelated. I think the platforms themselves, these private actors and industry is important in this equation of accountability as well. And so comparing in the book, like I do, the experiences with social media, Facebook in particular, and what I've seen with these Gen AI platforms, there's a lot more introspection now, kind of coming into the market in this techlash milieu. I think has been a good lesson for companies like OpenAI and Anthropic to try to do this better than the social media platforms did. So I think all of those actors, so the government has a role to play for sure. the public and these tech journalists who have the expertise and frankly the time to be testing some of these products, and then lastly the industry itself to kind of do some work in self-regulating because it has some of those market incentives to do so.
Okay, yeah, thanks. That was really interesting, and just like John learned a new word that I will not repeat, I had never, Sarah, heard the word techlash. So that thank you for introducing that to me. Well, I want to follow up on several things you said and that Andrew said, but first let's go to John. John, your major focus is on blockchain, which is very much an accountability practice. Can you, like, since this is lifelong learning, not everyone here is a tech expert, can you sort of walk us through first what blockchain is with a specific focus on how it's going to end up allowing some accountability in the development of AI?
Absolutely. But before I do that and talk about blockchain and accountability related to blockchain, but I want a signed copy from Sarah on her book. Can't wait to read it. So a blockchain is call it a distributed shared ledger. And it's software, and it has a consensus model that dictates, how decisions or transactions get put on the ledger, if you will, frankly, in an immutable manner. And it's also very transparent. So everyone in the ecosystem can actually see the data or see the transactions that are happening on the blockchain. Literally the small person and the large person, they all can have access to this. And they all have a voice in governance as to what is a real transaction, what's not a real transaction that gets permanently imprinted onto the blockchain. Almost think of it as a title for a house or for a car where there's an official record. That record is in a distributed manner, unlike it's locked up in a shelf somewhere for your house at a town hall. It's actually open and visible for all. Typically and then on top of that, you can program things like smart contracts, or think of it as code on top of the blockchain. And that code effectively in smart contracts or whatever is basically programmable data structures that encode rules of business or rules of engagement. So how people can interact with the underlying blockchain, if you will. So in terms of accountability, I think Robert said it, typically the way we think about accountability is either from regulation or trusted parties like large banks, just because they are JP Morgan or Bank of America or AllianceBernstein in the asset management world. Just because of their size and their history and track record, they are trusted parties. But the operative word there, in my opinion, is trust. And that trust ultimately relies on people. And I think Charlie Munger has always said it the best, and Sarah just mentioned it. Incentive systems are very important. I'll show you the outcome if you tell me the incentive system. So these large players that we all trust, hopefully there's right incentive systems and right regulation. Even in government, you need to have the right incentive systems and make sure there's the right regulation. But you're relying on people and you're trusting ultimately on people. But when you can code the rules of issuing an asset, exchanging an asset, holding an asset, or anything related to that asset or that transaction on a blockchain, basically what you're doing is you're trusting the code. So a lot of Web3 or crypto or blockchain people call it trustless. You don't need to have an entity to verify the trust of that thing in order to make everyone accountable. You're actually trusting the code itself. So that's part of the reason why I think going forward, so we have, things that Sarah will talk about, deep fakes and other stuff. You want trust in terms of a way that it's transparent to all, so they know where the data is coming from and how the models were formed. As Sarah talked about in terms of the Gemini example, the very scary thing frankly, about Gen AI is there's a reflexive loop here. So, you have data, it's got to get pre-trained, and then it goes through this, and then it goes through this model, and it comes out with output. That output effectively goes back in as input for future purposes. So there's a reflexivity property here at play. And luckily, there was a human in the loop or humans in the loop in the case of Gemini, and they had to change things because as I think Andrew said earlier, the automation bias from these LLMs or these large language models can lead to permanent misinformation. So this is why it's super important that we have good work from not just trusted large parties, but maybe we should trust some code as well.
Okay, John, thank you. Fascinating stuff. Before I ask any follow-up questions on these, I feel like I kind of pigeonholed each of you. Andrew asking you about well-intentioned uses, Sarah about malicious uses, John about development. Would any of you like to speak to those other levels or the answers you heard from your fellow panel mates?
Well, I think I would like to talk about how, and I think Sarah started this. It's just many, many stakeholders involved, and it's not just a company, it's not just government, it's the users, it's the developers, and just an open source technology allows for more transparency, and that's one step further. But even things that start out as open, like OpenAI, feel a certain amount of massive financial pressure in order to do things. And they end up, frankly, effectively selling, control to Microsoft, and they become closed AI. So there's a big risk here that the existing incumbents with all their capital and data and their resources continue on a certain path that will not allow the Gemini situation to happen in the future, where people don't get effectively a vote on how things are developed going forward. So I think it's super important to think about all the stakeholders. And that's one thing that's good about Web3, in my opinion. Web3 is not just about the open underlying technology of the blockchain itself, but the tokenization, or the token itself, is a unifying financial coordinator of all the stakeholders in that system.
Sarah, any elaborations?
I mean, I think John makes a really important point that I would like to second, which is that, I think it's important for there to be, to have accountability. I think there needs to be some degree of democratization. And I don't mean that in a government sense, but just that different actors have the exposure and capacity and power to actually provide alternatives and interact meaningfully with what's in the market. And I do think that there's a risk, given how resource intensive these models are, that we'll just see a consolidation of these different platforms. And we, I think, can see, and I'm now like kind of undermining what I just said, but it's also very consistent with its idea of opportunity and risk. There is opportunity. These big platforms will come out with great, large products that will, I think, really vastly improve the efficiency of what we do day to day. But that will also create a world where their values are encoded into those things we're using. And so OpenAI, for example, has talked about super alignment. And it sounds really like a fancy word, like there's responsibility embedded in that, but it's a real question of alignment with whose values. And if it's alignment with the developer, these coders, these 5 coders or however many there are, or 5 platforms, I think that leads to a circularity that may or may not be very salutary for society.
Thank you. I want to say that I've been involved in a project that is trying to expand the scope of accounting so that it is more helpful for issues like these even. And the big thing when people think about accounting, they typically think of one stakeholder. It's all about the owners. And then sometimes we'll say non-owner stakeholders and lump them all together. So I'm working with a team, and what we are doing is we are building an accounting theory that, just like Cornell has its any student, any study, we have any concern about performance and any stakeholder. And so it's great to hear what you're saying. It's going to go directly into my next set of notes to my co-authors. I see we have a whole bunch of questions rolling in and not a whole lot of time. Before we go to questions, though, since this is a lifelong learning panel, I'm hoping each of you can just give a little bit of learning advice to our audience. So what advice would you give to someone who isn't an expert in AI? They're just running a business or building a career. What do they need to know about AI, and how would they go about learning it? And Sarah, since you are a professor at Cornell, I'll start with you.
Well, they can take our classes. No, I think it's exciting because when I was growing up, and I'm showing my age here, to learn anything, we had a set of encyclopedias. And you had to go and look things up, and you had to know a certain amount to be able to access the material you wanted. And obviously it was really static, because how often could you get a new set of encyclopedias? Not very often. And in this world that we're living in, things are changing every day. And that, I think, it really affords a lot of opportunities for, kind of like what we're talking about, is so democratized in a lot of ways. And the opportunity for self-teaching is incredible. I know one of our peer institutions, MIT, puts all of its lectures, not all, but a lot of them online. Anyone can take a bunch of MIT level classes on AI and machine learning. There are so many different versions of that. People can just sit and learn machine learning themselves. They can self-teach. And I think that's really exciting and something that people should do. At the very least, I think it's really important to actually also use some of these tools, because I think it's the best way to learn is by doing. And the more you use these tools, like ChatGPT, the more you realize the different ways in which they can, I think, make your life easier, and not, as I think Andrew said, not take us out of the loop, but just kind of have this interaction between kind of our technology and ourselves to make our lives easier, and in a workplace setting, just kind of improve efficiencies, while keeping, again, kind of your own, I guess, imprint and signature on the work, so that we don't just end up in this kind of monoculture of output.
Thank you. Andrew, thoughts on lifelong learning advice?
Yeah. Look, maybe not surprisingly, I see lots of opportunities for the technology, and I believe that not using it will actually leave you at a competitive disadvantage. I actually like to compare AI, and especially Gen AI, to the internet in the mid-90s. At the time, the World Wide Web, as we used to call it, was only used by academics and scientists. I was at Cornell at the time, majoring in computer science, and I started using the World Wide Web to connect to colleagues around the country. And today, as you all know, the internet is a vital part of our everyday lives. We use it for many of our daily tasks, and we probably feel powerless if we can't connect to the internet. It probably took about 10, 15 years to get there, but eventually the internet became indispensable, right? And so can you imagine doing your job today or running your business today without the internet, right? So probably unthinkable. Well, my view is that the same will happen with Gen AI. It will transform the way we work, the way we interact with each other, and the way we live our lives. We don't know exactly what the future looks like, but my suggestion is to learn the technology, and really imagine ways that you can use it to drive better and faster decisions. And I think, in my view, adopting the technology sooner rather than later will enhance and probably prolong your competitive edge.
Okay, thank you. So let's turn now. Actually, wait, I didn't get to John. So John,
I'll be very quick, because I think Andrew and Sarah really covered it well. One is obviously continuing education, self-ingesting education, either on this or take actual classes. And two, I think they both mentioned it, be a user. It's so easy to just download ChatGPT or download Perplexity and do it. In fact, when I was at Cornell a couple of weeks ago, my daughter is a junior there. I was, hanging out at the computer science lab and talking to a few kids. And a lot of these kids are using these things called, there's a program called Fleet. And what Fleet is basically it's an LLM plugin for Python. So basically it constantly imports all the Python libraries at various places and various terminals, that is, and makes it easier for anyone to basically become a data analyst. At some point, you don't have to really even know Python, but you want to be able to be a data analyst. And these kids are creating reports that look nicer and they're done easier and faster. I'm sure, Andrew at Alliance has young, analysts right now who are doing work that, he could not have done when he was an analyst. I remember when I was managing a team of analysts, either at my firm or at Kingdon, they were, scraping the web by coding and doing things. Now there's programs to do it. But the analyst bar when I was a young analyst was basically who can write macros in Excel better. Now it's like lifted to a whole nother level where they had to write code themselves. And now you have these things where there's LLM plugins that they don't even have to write the code themselves, but they know how to use these tools. So use it in your daily life. You may not be one of these fresh Cornell grads, but you can use it in other areas.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and I want to second that. Just getting your hands in these things will give you a much better appreciation for what they can and honestly what they can't get right. What's the first thing I did? I asked ChatGPT, I think this was 3.5 or something. I started asking it all about me and my colleagues. And according to ChatGPT, I am a Nobel Prize winner. So, my mother feels great about that, but it didn't make me feel great about relying on ChatGPT for factual material. I want to turn to Q&A, and I'm going to start with a question from Victoria Tang, who asks, could you comment on Mustafa Suleiman's recent TED Talk comment that we should be thinking of AI as a new digital species and not just as tools? And I want to this actually ties in directly to my own lifelong learning suggestion, which builds on something that the Federal Trade Commission wrote a few years ago when they were targeting algorithmic discrimination by Facebook and some other companies. And the FTC wrote, with its mysterious jargon like machine learning and neural networks and deep learning, AI can seem almost magical. And that's true. But from the FTC's point of view, the algorithm is just like another employee. If your business is advertising apartments to white people, but not Black people, the FTC doesn't care whether it's because you used some whiz-bang Gen AI technology or because your Uncle Marvin has some old-fashioned views. Either way, they see it as your job to hold that agent, that autonomous agent, accountable. And this goes back to this notion of AI, and especially generative AI, as being like, Suleiman calls it a digital species. I just call it an alien species, because the way AI thinks is nothing like we are used to. It's just truly alien, and no one's really going to understand the psychology of AI. But it turns out you don't have to understand someone's psychology to know how to hold them accountable, to make sure you're assigning them only the jobs that they can do, to make sure that you're tracking their performance and you're right on top of it when it starts going wrong. And where's your lifelong learning for all of that? Honestly, it's learning accounting, right? And just basic accounting, accountability, management skills. So I just want to, use Victoria's question to highlight the importance of a broad thinking business degree that now you can apply to this crazy new world. Let's see, we have a number of other questions. Andrew, this one's directed to you from Roland Warfield. Is there worry that at some point AI will replace the human decision maker?
Yeah. Look, Rob, I actually just want to comment on, on the prior question. I think it's a very philosophical question, right? And we can probably spend, days debating it. I like to think, that as a species, as human species, things don't evolve that quickly, right? It takes time for things to change dramatically. So I always think like, you know what, the current paradigm might actually cover more things than we actually think, right? So I think our current paradigm, whether it's the way we manage risk, the way we think about responsibility, I think a lot of it still covers AI, even though it definitely introduces some new things. So because of that, my view in that context is these tools, while they're very helpful, I don't see them replacing human decision makers, at least in finance, in the near future, because it's critical that we have accountability and human decision makers who are going to own those decisions, right? I think you can't say the algorithm made me buy that stock and therefore that's that, right? And so I don't think that's going to happen in the near future, right? So that's what I would suggest.
Okay, thank you. So a couple questions for Sarah. One is just from Sarah Barrera. Could you please repeat the parties you see as necessary for enacting accountability? And just a related question here, as I see it anyway, from Roland Warfield. Do you foresee legislation that states how AI can be used? If so, how will it be monitored and what would the penalties be?
Good questions. And like Andrew, I'm kind of stuck on this philosophical question on species. So I want to actually try to use that question and connect it with the second one that was just asked. Because I was stuck on this question of, is it a different species? But then I started thinking, does it even matter? Like if you had an environment and a new species came along, well, you had a set of laws, let's say, and expectations. Well, you would just enforce, why do you think about why would a new species matter? What you really want to know, I think, is what your outcome is that you're interested in, and you want a safe, discrimination-free system. Well, just use that existing environment and expect and enforce that this new species has to comply with those existing laws about discrimination and bias. So I guess I wondered whether this question of new species was kind of a, no pun intended, red herring, and really is a distinction without a meaningful difference. And so I think that foreshadows my response to this question of new laws. And I think a couple of the other responses have gone in this direction as well. We have a set of laws. We have laws about discrimination and bias, and it shouldn't, and I don't think does matter whether it's an algorithm that was discriminatory or a person, that those algorithms then have to be accountable to those existing laws. And we're seeing that in ongoing legal cases about the 1976 Copyright Act, which obviously way preceded Gen AI, let alone the modern internet. But that's what's being used to think about whether these models that have scraped the internet are fair use or whether they're a violation of those copyright laws. I'm not of the view that this is a different enough problem that we need a new set of laws, or it's at least not clear. And I think the concern would be that it, again, kind of steep part of the S curve, it's moving so fast, you could come up with some law that might be obsolete tomorrow. And then on the question of what were the three actors, I mean, I think it's probably more than three, but it's the government, it's the public, and by the public, I mean individual users, tech journalists, kind of that marketplace, and then industry itself in that context of responsiveness and self-regulation.
Okay, thank you. I didn't realize the species comment would get so much traction among the panelists. I want to quickly say, I mean, the way I think about this is, let's start with a hammer. When we talk about holding a hammer accountable, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. We look to the person who's wielding it. And if we go to the other extreme and we talk about an employee, It's true that there's this long history in law about looking up. What is it? Superior respondeat, I think it's called, where if someone does something bad, you look to their boss, you look to their commanding officer. They may also be responsible, but we have a very clear sense that people, in most cases, have moral responsibility. Unlike a hammer. And so and that shapes how we hold people accountable because we hold them morally responsible. If you look at AI as this sort of weird alien or digital species, it turns out we're sort of in a middle ground here because there's no reason to think that AI has moral responsibility, but it is designed to have autonomous agency. And so we can't view it just as a hammer. And so the way I talk about it, when I lead deliberations on this type of stuff, there's holding AI accountable from the inside and holding it accountable from the outside. And when you hold it accountable from the inside, you're talking about how you're training it, how you're developing it. I think a bunch of the stuff that John was addressing of what data does it have, what is the training model, what are the weights, the incentive weights and all of that. And that's really techie and way beyond me. But if someone comes to me and says, I have a chatbot in my customer website and it is insulting customers. Now we can talk about holding it accountable from the outside, which is just the same set of tools that we generally have in accountability, which is role design, what authorities and obligations come with their job, what roles do we assign them, so role assignment, and then reporting incentives don't really make much sense, and control. So anyway, I found it more useful, but yes, definitely philosophical. Let's talk, as long as we're talking about AI a little bit as a species, let's talk about how they affect another species on the planet, which is human beings. Here's a question to everyone from Christian. What are your thoughts about the implementation of AI replacing existing jobs? Do you believe that the government has an ethical responsibility to protect those whose jobs will be in jeopardy from AI? And I guess I would add to that, and which jobs do you think those are? Does that include accounting professors? Who'd like to take that?
Yeah, maybe I can start, Rob. So the way that I think about AI is like 10,000 interns is what we like to say, right? So these are folks, so if you had 10,000 interns working for you, what would you have them do, right? Well, in our industry, we probably would have them listen to conference calls, read reports, go out into the into society and monitor things, right? So those are things that I think potentially AI can help with, right? But those interns aren't going to remain interns forever. We would like them to hopefully build skills over time so they become smarter in investing, better client-facing individuals, and so forth. So they become subject matter experts within our space, right? So I would say that these tools can potentially replace some of the more mundane run-of-the-mill tasks, at least in the near future. But it also gives an opportunity for those 10,000 interns to then hopefully build other skills and learn along the way. So that's how I see some of this, that as these technologies come in, there are opportunities for these individuals to build those new skills and hopefully to add more value to the broader role that they're providing to a company or to a profession.
Okay, excellent. And Sarah?
Yeah, I think there's no doubt that this technology will and is already disrupting the labor market. I don't think this is the first time we've seen disruption from new technologies. And I think that's part of what makes a dynamic economy. And I think in this case, what I think is different compared to, I don't know, 5 or 10 years ago, where it was kind of all about robotics and the concern about whether automation and the Amazon distribution facility would put people out of work. I think this one is a very different one. I mean, kind of like John's example of Fleet and the plugin for Python it's very interesting because it's now, I think, much more squarely focused on white collar employment. And in a lot of ways, that's, I think, an easier problem to solve because, and I'm not a labor economist, but it's sort of like there's more fungibility in the white collar workforce for the retraining. But looking at at journalism and marketing, I think there will be a lot of change within those industries because, like Andrew was saying, you now have, things are just easier. So things that would have taken 10 people many days can now be done in one click. So I think that there will be a period of adjustment.
Thank you. John, do you want to speak to the employment issue? Because we only have 4 minutes left, and
I'll be very quick then. I'll be very quick.
Okay, but I just want to say I also want to hear your thoughts, which may be related to this, on Empire AI. So if you could just talk also a little bit about what that is and what you think it means.
Great. So for the first question, I think it's most relevant for the children of people listening or the panelists' children, because, Sarah's right. This has been going on. Every time there's new technology, some displacement happens. But this time, I think this displacement or change is going to affect a lot of, call it, traditional graduates at a Cornell or somewhere else. So I think they really need to think about what industry they're going to and realize that not only the tech, but the economic cycles are so short that their skills have to transcend any specific vertical industry and be able to be applied in many different areas. In terms of Empire AI, I think that's a very exciting thing. For those who don't know, Cornell University, the computer science department, is one of the strongest and considered one of the best research institutes around. But because the cost of creating these models, these generative AI models, and the cost of compute power needed and the energy that's required, that's somewhat prohibitive for small players. So it is a little worrisome that the traditional research that's come from major universities, now they have to find ways to get the dollars to build the compute centers and the clusters for the compute power in order to continue doing their research. Because you have firms like, Meta or Facebook, they spent $30 billion recently to purchase 500,000 GPUs in order to be able to develop Llama, which is actually technically is an open source thing, but we'll talk about that later. But they're going to make money on top of Llama is really the answer. But it's become prohibitive to others to do similar research. So Empire AI is the state coming together with 6 universities in the New York area with the ultimate goal of bringing technology jobs to New York State. And that first comes with great research at the university. So Cornell obviously is going to be a big part of this. They're going to contribute into the dollars necessary. And these data center clusters will be built in Buffalo and hopefully some in Cornell as well. But the beneficiaries are Cornell, Columbia, NYU, and some of the SUNY schools.
Okay, thank you. That takes us right up to the end of the hour, and the number one rule of teaching is never, ever go over. So I'm just going to say thanks to our panelists. Thanks to our audience, all of you, for joining us at the virtual kickoff of yet another Cornell SC Johnson College of Business lifelong learning experience. I hope you found it valuable and that you'll tune in again soon. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.